Welcome to Shorty SuperCoach, and today we're going to take a look at the St Kilda Football Club and everything they've got to offer us in the land of SuperCoach for 2017. A bit of a mixture of youth and the more experienced guys will feature today. And if you haven't caught any of these previews so far, it's basically where I take a broad look at all the options throughout each club. Not necessarily your obvious selections or your draftees, but more so guys that are capable of maybe having a breakout season, returning from injury, or just guys that provoke a little bit of discussion and could be ones that have a fair bit of debate surrounding their selection throughout the pre-season. So we'll kick off with a couple of old timers that I still think are worth considering, and I think Lee Montagna tops the list. Now, of course, he was another one of those mid-forwards that we've lost. He's now just a pure defender, but that's not the worst thing in the world. I mean, it's always good to have a guy who's capable of scoring big points in the back line. And certainly Montagna is that. You'll have to pay $538,000 for him, averaged 98.9 last year. And certainly his numbers, when you look back, have been quite amazing. Now, of course, 2009 averaged 125.2, was up there with the very elite, and then backed it up in 2010 with 114.8. And he's had lapses from time to time because he has averaged 90 plus since 2007, except for 89.4 in 2014. But he has revisited those really big years. 2013 averaged 114, and then 2015, quite recent, averaged 111. He is 33 years old, mind you, but it is worth considering last year we did see a change in his role, hence why he is now eligible as a defender. Now, what was that role change? He was a loose man out of the back line and a nice distributor for St Kilda out of the defensive 50. Often played that +1 player, running by for the handball. He is a nice user of the ball and an experienced head in what was a fairly youthful back line for St Kilda. Now, he had a pretty good season, averaged good numbers, 98.9 average as I said, but some real important stats definitely went down. And it was evident in the change in role, no doubt. I mean, of course, when he's in the midfield, lots of clearances, contested ball, more tackles because you're around the stoppage more often. Now, those numbers from 2010 to 2015, clearances, he averaged between 3 and 4 every year. Last year, just 1.4. Contested possession over the same timeline, averaged 8 to 10 throughout those years. Last year was just 5.9. And his tackles, averaged between 4 to 5 tackles for 2010 to 2015. Last year fell back to 2.7. So no doubt it was obvious the decline and the change in role certainly had an impact, but it didn't stop his ability to win plenty of the ball and use it nicely. So is he worth considering? I definitely think he is. Are we going to see those big 105 plus numbers? I wouldn't have thought so. I'd almost categorically rule it out. What do I expect him to probably average? I'd probably expect him to drop off ever so slightly, just with age and just with a bit more of those St Kilda young guys coming through. I would expect him to maybe average around your 95 to 96, but I wouldn't be surprised if he can maintain what he did last year, maybe go 99 to 100. I definitely think his range is quite clear. He's shown his consistency, but I think he's also shown that his numbers aren't going to explode like they have in the past. So I think it's pretty confident we could bank on him to average 95 to 100. Now, if you're happy with that, sure, go for it. But he certainly is a little pricey. I myself am going to watch for his pre-season and how he's travelling there. I think it's very important that we do see that same role. I mean, I wouldn't have thought we'd see the midfield role. I mean, they've got so many young guys putting their hands up for that. I think the days of Montagna playing that role are gone. So what we want to see is the fact that he is the designated guy coming out of the back line. They want to give it to Joey. That's what we want to see, because that'll mean that he's getting a lot of easy ball, effective kicks, and they add up to some pretty nice numbers as we've seen. He's certainly not a lock because, as I mentioned in a lot of previews, we have been fairly well blessed this year with the defence. Quite a few good inclusions, and Shaw and Doherty and Simpson are really confident picks this year, which we haven't always had in the back line. So Montagna certainly provokes a bit of discussion. I think it'll be a point of difference. So certainly have a look out for how he's travelling, and one to consider, and he could be a POD for your side. Another experienced campaigner and a SuperCoach favourite over the journey is, of course, Nick Riewoldt. He's been fantastic for us, and I must say I probably have written him off over the last couple of years. I thought his scoring days were over, a mixture of a poor St Kilda side and injuries. Now, he managed to reinvent himself, as all champions somehow managed to do. He's priced at 549,000 I should say. You'd be getting him for a bargain if he was priced around 450, don't you worry. But he averaged 101 last year, and he certainly, like Montagna, changed his role around. Now, of course, the next premiership side for St Kilda isn't going to have Riewoldt centre half forward. It's going to have Membry or McCartan or Bruce. So they left the 50 to those guys and allowed Riewoldt to roam and use his aerobic capacity and his great running ability, which he's seen throughout his whole career, and sort of played a Matthew Richardson style role where he went higher up the ground, a bit of a wing, and sort of had a license to roam, and that equated in some massive numbers. He had career high touches, 20.8, and career high marks, 10.6. Now, of course, not as many contested marks, but certainly gets a lot on the lead and just works his way up the ground and is a fantastic outlet for the St Kilda players. Now, he still managed to kick 41 goals, and in his last game, he dominated Brisbane, 21 marks, 9 goals, 187 SuperCoach points. Unbelievable stuff. Now, like Montagna, 2005 to 2010 saw some unbelievable numbers for Riewoldt. Will we be seeing those again? Obviously not. You know, he's past his prime, of course, but can we still see some outstanding numbers? I definitely think so. I would probably expect him to stay around his average of about 100. I wouldn't have thought we'd see an explosion in numbers, but certainly he's definitely capable of maybe bumping it up by 1, maybe 2. But like Montagna, when there's age and a potential body query, there's always that worry that they could slightly drop off, because sometimes it can go quickly for these experienced players, which is why it takes guts. You know, certainly we can bank on champions, but soon enough they do have a poor season, a la Matthew Pavlich, you know, an absolute god for Supercoach land for a long time. And at some stage, as Pav did, he dropped off significantly. Didn't necessarily have a poor season, football standard-wise, but certainly as far as his numbers in Supercoach, it did dwindle. So we'll definitely have to be worrying or watching out for that with Riewoldt. We'll have to see a full pre-season from him, you know, that he's on top of the ground, looking really good. And I think it's important that we see that same role, that he is playing high and will get a lot more of the ball and also work back to the goals when necessary. Because I think that at his age and where the Saints are at, that's his exact role for scoring points. So I'm probably not going to pick him, to be brutally honest. I think there's a little bit too much risk involved, and I think the likes of Dalhouse and McRae are certainly obvious F1 and 2 candidates. Heaney will be extremely popular as well. So I think a lot of our first 3 forwards will be very similar. Therefore, you know, you might want to go Riewoldt for something a little bit different. But if you're looking at key position players, certainly Tom Lynch and Riewoldt, you know, the old and the new, they've been compared to one another. And I certainly think one of them might be your top 6 to 8 forward. Picking it could be interesting. You know, Gold Coast, poor side. Lynch doesn't exactly have the runs on the board just yet. You know, certainly a gun player, and I think he's destined to be a Supercoach gun. Whereas in Riewoldt, you know, twilight of a Supercoach champion, it's a real nice sort of risk versus reward. You know, the future versus the past, and it'll be interesting to see whether people do go with one of those 2 key forwards, because there's been a bit of discussion about, you know, maybe going one of them, particularly Lynch. So I think they're probably the 2 most Supercoach relevant players that played reasonable footy last year. One that didn't play footy last year and has struggled for many years, but I think he's very relevant, is Nathan Freeman. Now, of course, 123,900, you'll get him as a midfielder. We all know his story. He struggled to get on the park for a long time, hamstring this, hamstring that. And when he's come back, he's dominated VFL, but soon enough, he's pinged another hammy, or he's done something else, which is, you know, a soft tissue sort of injury, which when you're coming back from such a long layoff, you are prone to other things going. You often see guys, you know, they've been out with hammies, but then a calf goes, or, you know, something else is sore. But, you know, just a real guy who has struggled to get his body right. But having said that, I don't think we can deny his talent. He's certainly a fantastic player when he's up and running. Didn't he have something like 40, 50 touches in the VFL and not even a full game last year? I certainly think when he's up and going, you know, he's a former top 10 pick, obviously at the Pies, and now he's found his way to St Kilda. The problem is we couldn't bank on his body whatsoever. You know, it's arguably the most injury-prone hammies in the game. Now, it's disappointing. You hope that he can get back to it, and I think if we do see a good pre-season out of him, even just a couple of NAB challenge games, that'll be enough, even one. I think if he's named round one, you just have to take that risk. I mean, at 123,000, you can't really lose out. If he did play a couple of games and got injured, well, I think that's annoying, but you just have to look back and go, well, it was certainly worth the risk, because if he comes off, there's guys surrounding him that are draftees and haven't played a game. He's a seasoned campaigner, obviously hasn't played many games and has struggled with injury, but he knows what the AFL system's about, and I think he's physically ready. Of course, he's had gym work and whatnot, so it's just a matter of getting those muscles right and getting some run into his legs, and he could be one of the best cash cows of the season. So I often say watch their pre-season, but it's as important as ever for Nathan Freeman, because that will simply define his selection. If he doesn't have a good one, you would be crazy to consider him. If he does have a good one, you'd probably be crazy to not take the risk on him. So certainly keep an eye on him. A couple other young guys, a couple of Jacks, or even 3 Jacks now that I look at it. We'll start with Jack Billings. Now, he's had so much promise. He looks destined for stardom. You'll have to pay $407,000 for him. Here's a mid-forward option. He's long been considered the next big thing at St Kilda, and I think when we see more midfield time from him, then we'll certainly start to see that. But at the moment, I just don't think you can pick him. He just hasn't put it on the board. He's played 3 years. He's gone 16 games, 9 games, 17 games for averages 61.1, 84.3, and last year 74.9. Now, of course, that 2015 was where he burst on the scene, had some great games, kicked goals, was dynamic up forward as well as pushing up high, that sort of half-forward flank mid-rotation role. But I just don't think he can be paying $400K for a guy who isn't proven. Yes, he's exciting. Yes, he might be a good SuperCoach draft pick. But as far as your classic goes, it's just far too risky. As far as mid-prices go, he's certainly on the expensive side of that. And I don't think we can, he's had a little bit of problems with his body as well. And his scoring isn't proven. Now, if we were to see him absolutely entrenched in the midfield rotation at St Kilda, then that might throw a curveball and you might consider him. But I will not be picking him. Simple as that. I'll be looking more at a Heaney or a wing guard, things like that going, paying a little bit extra, but feeling like you could definitely bank on it a lot more. I think Billings will be a great player for a long time. Certainly got the world of potential ahead of him, but I don't think 2017 will be his season. He would definitely probably improve on that average of 75, but you couldn't mount a case that he'd be a good selection, I wouldn't have thought, based on the fact that what we got to pay and the fact that I couldn't see him averaging 95. So that's enough on Billings. Move on to Jack Steele, slightly cheaper, $347,000, a mid-forward option. Now, I like him a little bit more. Of course, was an amazing talent at the Giants and was sort of squeezed out, I suppose, and wanted to come back. And as he has done, he's found his way to St Kilda, and opportunity awaits, no doubt about that. So 347, mid-forward option. That's a recipe for, you must consider. So bear in mind, he's only 21, only played 17 games, averaged 63.8 last year. Now, while his price and dual position status warrants consideration, his games and experience really warrants concern. Now, what we're going to need is a considerable up in his average, probably 25 points, I'd have to say. If you pay him $350K, you'd want to see definitely high 80s to low 90s so he can make you a fair bit of cash in the early parts of the season. And I think it's possible. I'd probably see him averaging around 85 for the year, but if he has a ripping pre-season and you feel like he can dominate early and he's really worked his way into that real engine room at St Kilda, then you might consider him. I'm probably a bit like Billings, a bit wary. Another thing with Steele, struggled to get time on ground, 73.5% time on ground last year, and we all know why. The Giants just have a wealth of talent, we all know that, so hard to get a gig in there. He should get a regular gig with St Kilda, one would think, and he loves a contested ball, he loves a tackle, and I think if he can get more midfield minutes, then we'll naturally see his SuperCoach average increase somewhat significantly, because he could probably up his tackles from 4 to 6 quite easily, and I think his contested ball was around 6 out of 15 touches, I think it was, roughly. I didn't write those down, but I think we could easily see that go up to 9 or 10 because he's that sort of player, and you could easily see if he averages 21, 22 touches that nearly half of those could certainly be contested. So I could certainly see him bumping his average up by 20 odd. Is that enough? I wouldn't have thought so, but if you're really, really keen on him, you might want to take the risk. If you feel he can average 90 and he's been a highly touted young guy, then you might take the gamble. But if I'm predicting averages, I'm probably saying, look, Steele, you're probably going to average about 86. That's what I'm reckoning. But if you're really a big fan of him and you've liked what you've seen, which many have, then you may be, well, you'd have to be very keen on him, but you might take the risk. Jack Stephen, of course, arguably their best midfielder, you'd have to say. 560k, average 103. Now, some people always look back to Stephen because he is such an explosive player. He's sort of priced just below that elite premium status and has shown the ability to score big, averaged 110 in 2013. That starts to get people thinking. Personally, I wouldn't be considering him. I thought I'd touch off on him, but I wouldn't be considering him. I think probably that 110 in 2013 may end up being his career high best season. I mean, I think we'll probably more so see him average around 100 to 105, maybe 106. I don't think he's quite got the absolute game to go elite. He may prove me wrong because I think he's an extremely exciting player, but at this stage I probably see him averaging pretty much where he has the last couple of years. 103, 104. That 110 remains a bit of an outlier, so we'll have to wait and see if he can get back to that. As I've said in the past, I'm not one for taking too many gambles in the midfield, especially when you're going upward of 500k. I certainly think there's some great options that provide a bit more value and a bit more potential and scope for really going up in their average per game. So I think Stephen's an extremely good player. Probably not in the absolute elite SuperCoach scoring yet. He's pretty close as an elite player. Has certainly won a few games off his own boot, but I don't think we'll be seeing him in too many SuperCoach sides. And lastly, I'll cover off on Seb Ross. Now, he was an absolute gun last season, exactly what we look for, and basically everyone missed him, averaging 67 in 2015. He bumped that up to 94 last year and certainly had a pretty consistent season, really. Had a 150 and a 130, but aside from that, he was pretty consistent at early in the season, hitting your 80s to 90s, and then really caught fire late and started to turn those into your low hundreds, and certainly was consistently hitting 90. So very, very good player. Another one that the Saints have uncovered as an exciting prospect. He's only a midfielder, so that immediately crosses him off the list as far as I'm concerned, because you're going to have to pay a fair amount of cash, obviously. He averaged 94, so no doubt we're going to have to fork out a bit for a bloke who's pretty much unproven. I mean, of course, averaging 94, when you look at that bracket, you're thinking if you're picking a guy who's averaged 94, then basically you want to turn that into a keeper. I mean, it's pretty much as simple as that. I mean, you pick a guy who's averaged around 90 to, high 90s, then you're picking him on the basis that he's going to turn that average into 110, even 108 if you don't really want to go absolutely huge. I think 108 is where we can probably roughly take that draw point of a premium mid. I mean, we'd love 110 plus, but I think, if you pick a guy at 94 and he averages 108, you probably accept that. And I don't think Ross is going to do that. I think we'll probably see a bit of natural improvement as he's still young and an improving side. He may be able to touch that up to around 100, but I certainly don't think he's ready to crack the absolute elite. Naturally, he'll get a bit more attention for sure, as well as clubs do a bit more homework on him, and he was quite damaging, so may receive a little bit more attention as well. So you have to simply cross him off the list. I mean, some people might look at him and go, oh, gee, he could absolutely explode. Look at the back end of his year, but I wouldn't be taking that sort of risk in the midfield. So that's about it for the Saints. They certainly are providing a bit of excitement around the footy world. Certainly them and Melbourne, a lot of people are expecting to jump up, and I think they probably are, a bit like the Saints and Geelong of the early 2000s, the two sort of young clubs that are really looking the most likely to explode up the ladder and hit the top 8 with a fair amount of heat. And I think that's probably about spot on. A lot of good young talent with a mixture of solid experience in there. So and that's reflected in what we look at with our SuperCoach. You know, a few older guys and a few potentially next generation guns. So it'll be very good to see how it all pans out. There's certainly some guys to consider there, and ones that might provoke a little bit of debate because some offer point of different status, others require a fair bit of guts and courage to go with their price and lack of real experience in SuperCoach and footy. So it'll be great to see how it goes. Let me know how you thought on everything St Kilda. Let me know your thoughts, I should say. But yeah, if you're enjoying what I'm doing, we're nearly through all the clubs. So if you're watching this one and you haven't seen a couple other clubs, or you haven't seen your club, then get to my channel and I'm sure it'll be there, unless you're waiting on some Sydney Dogs and West Coast. And if you are, they won't be far away, probably within the next week or something. So stay tuned for those. Subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying it. That's the most important thing. I think if you're watching it and you haven't subscribed and think, oh, I'll watch his videos, that's alright, well, that's great. I mean, I appreciate you watching them, but it's always really good to see another subscriber. It sort of just says, look, I'm enjoying what you're doing, and I guess it's a number that shows improvement. It's always good to see those subscriptions go up, and it sort of reinforces that what you're doing is actually of interest to some people. So let me know your thoughts, give us a comment. It's always good. I know I haven't got around to a few comments just as yet, but I've just hit holidays, so I'll certainly look to get around to a few of those comments that are waiting to be answered pretty soon. Of course, like the video, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. So thank you very much, guys. I'll see you soon.